Hello, and welcome to the Coaxum Report. This is Terry Coaxum, and I am truly delighted to be joined today by Reverend Dennis Dillon. He's a publisher, the CEO of New York Christian Times, and the lead pastor of Rise Church Global. It is truly a pleasure to be joined by Reverend Dennis Dillon today, and he'll be talking to our listening audience about barriers, best practices, and big ideas. And he'll talk to us a little bit about what is meant when we say Black church mean business, as well as how important the media is and how important the Christian Times is to our communities. And so, Reverend Dennis Dillon.
Blessings on
No.
you. How are you?
I'm blessed. It's truly an honor to have you on the show today on the Coaxum Report. In case you're not aware, and those that are tuning in, they can listen to us on our TV network. They can also catch us on Roku. They can catch us on Apple. They can catch us on Fire TV. And so it truly is an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today, Reverend Dillon. Talk to us a little bit about who you are and so we can get into it.
Well, it is certainly an honor to be with you, Terry, and I certainly want to salute you for your great work and
Thank you.
all that you do. That's just truly, truly exciting and wonderful. Again, I'm Dennis Dillon. I'm Brooklyn-based in terms of our ministry and our work, and I'm excited. We've been publishing the New York Christian Times for in excess of 33 years. So
Wow.
it's been a blessing, fruitful in so many ways, and
Absolutely
grateful to God for all his blessings that are just too many to count.
So now let me ask you, Reverend Dillon, I know you were in media for a little while, and so it's no small feat that you took on the Christian Times to really give our communities access to the media, access to sharing our narrative. But before we get there, I want to back up a little bit because this show, the Coaxum Report, we're here. We talked to small business. We talk to industry leaders like yourself, and we try to kind of break down the barriers. The barriers first is what we start off with. Like, what were some of the barriers to entry in taking on the Christian Times and being a pastor, the lead pastor? In addition to that, having a phenomenal conference every year where you're highlighting and spotlighting, Black wealth in Black church means business. And so want you to kind of talk to our listening audience a little bit about what all that means, because you've been able to do this successfully for so many years. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are in this space, why you thought it was important to be there. And then more importantly, I want you to talk a bit about the barriers, because we'll go on and talk about some of the things that you've done that have created these best practices that have sustained you over the years. And then we'll get into some of the big ideas for those that are listening to us. And one thing I wanted to mention, your brothers and sisters in the Caribbean are able to view us on our show. So we're able to be broadcast throughout all of the Caribbean, throughout all of Southeast Asia, and of course here in the United States. So don't be surprised if you get a call, saying that we saw you on the Coaxum Report. So talk to us.
That's good, Iron. I'm excited. But if I were just to go back to your first question and your first key point there, and that is why the vehicle, understanding the importance of media.
That's
it's
right.
Interesting that just from a biblical perspective, the first thing we really know about God, particularly when we get to the New Testament, is that he is the Word.
That's right.
Word. And so communication, word, messages, whether we're communicating words through, speaking, audio, whether we're doing it through writing, through through video, visuals, as we're doing now.
Right.
Whether it's journeying directly from the pulpit, or it's in lecture halls, or it's movie theaters. At the end of the day, it's getting the information out.
That's right.
And what is key that we've suffered from, particularly the Black world, is having vehicles that are credible in terms of how do we get our message out. And so very clearly, when we started the New York Christian Times back in 1990 in Brooklyn, the commitment was to make sure that we're communicating.
Wait a minute, 1990?
19.
Wow. That's over 30-something years ago.
It is.
I didn't realize that.
It is 33 years ago. And
wow.
enough, I was much younger back then. But when we put out the first Christian Times, we did about 10,000 copies. I don't know how the religion editor at the Daily News at the time got it, but he got hold of a copy, and he subsequently came over and interviewed me and wrote a story. And what interests me about his story is that he said he gave the stats that 80% of all new newspapers in the New York area fold after 2 years.
Wow.
And he made the point that this was like a David against Goliath matchup.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, this is the little Christian Times Daily News.
Right.
And indeed, it has been. At one point, the Daily News actually
almost folded.
Was a publication that the Christian Times was inserted in on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So it's been a tremendous journey. We're excited about where the Lord has taken us. But what gives us the most satisfaction is to know that at the end of the day, through the Christian Times, we're bringing clergy leaders from all around the city and eventually from all around the country and the world together. We're bringing business leaders together. We're bringing elected leaders together, because in most cases outside of our community, that's what media does.
That's
in addition to communicating the message, media is that vehicle that synchronizes and synergizes and bring all of the pieces and the core elements together. So we're happy that the Lord has used us over these years, and we're prayerful that He will use us for years to come.
So this is really important for our listening audience. I want them to really walk away with the sense that their voice matters, right? And being able to shape our narrative, being able to tell our story in our own voice, not just to shape our narrative, but to tell in our own. Christian Times is able to do that. And, you know, it's really important for those that are here in the tri-state area to make sure they're getting copies of the Christian Times and are sharing it. More importantly, because when I look at my Christian Times, I'm seeing stories of people that look like me, that are part of what I'm doing, and I'm looking to encourage and inspire them. And so in that, we understand media matters, and you just mentioned it. Media really, really matters, because if our story isn't being told by us, our story is still being told. It's just not our story, right?
Absolutely.
So the Christian Times is making sure that we are telling our story and getting the word and the messages out, right? And so thank you so much for continuing to do that 33 years later. It's really important. I know when I walk into churches like Mount Pisgah or St. Paul's, they have copies of the Christian Times there. Even when I went over to New Jersey to church, they also had copies of the Christian Times there. So I want to thank you for the reach. The reach is far, and so that is a plus. So we can get into that publication, tell our stories in our own voice, and it be relevant, and to carry it through, because I understand the great book says something along the lines, write it down and make it plain, right? And so we're writing our stories down, and we're making sure that our stories are understood, right? Now, the other part of the barriers, though, I know that, he said it in the beginning, after 2 years, right? Most newspapers fold. And now you're going to put a Christian newspaper into publication. How, what are some of the barriers to that? I know there's this great divide with separation of church and state, right? And a lot of dollars come through way of advertisement, right? So how does that work for this type of publication? And so we can encourage our listening audience that want to see more of the Christian Times to be able to invest in their hometown newspaper.
And I think you're literally speaking to one of the key barriers, because I must first toot our horn and make the point that the New York Christian Times have seen more corporate advertising and more corporate sponsorship than any other Black-owned newspaper in the New York market over the past 30 years.
Wow. Okay.
I say that because I want to make a point. First of all, we made it a point in the Christian Times to ensure that it's about news, it's about information, it's about the community.
Right.
The most important element for the Christian Times is the market.
That's right.
And we know that the pulpit and the church has been the most effective market for information getting to the Black community in America. We're not making that up. It doesn't matter how far back you go. You can go back to Nat Turner if you like, Deacon Nat Turner. You can go back to Deacon Marcus Garvey. You could go back to all of these great men and women who've been iconic in their journey and in their efforts to help bring transformation, civil rights, and in a real sense, liberation to the Black world, certainly here.
Right.
That continues to be. So we always make the point to emphasize that what's most important and what everyone has to understand, particularly advertisers and corporate advertisers, that the Christian Times is really not a paper that proselytize. It's not a publication that necessarily talks religion. It's really a time that does provide a Christian perspective on everything else.
That's
Just like if we go back, a lot of people don't understand the historic nature of Christian Science Monitor. Christian Science Monitor, again, has been a mainstream, in a lot of ways, publication that has been distributed, and again, it's broad generic news, but the foundational base of distribution has been, of course, that Christian community. So from that vantage point, we have actually overcome those hurdles, and basically, it provides a strength, because we've if I could note, many of the major advertisers that subsequently began to advertise in many of the other Black-owned newspapers, they did so because the Christian Times initiated it.
Wow.
Recognize
so you guys have been breaking barriers and really giving access to those other outlets to be able to do this. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely, because we cannot sit on our power. We hear oft times that the Black church is a sleeping giant. And to a great degree, it is still a sleeping giant. Thanks be to God, it is probably more awake than most other institutions within the Black community.
I want to pause right there, because you're making a key point about the Black church being a sleeping giant, but more importantly, about our what we're going to do to take it to the next level. And so we're going to have to take a quick commercial break right now, and we'll be right back. And we're going to pick up where you left off with the significance of the Black church, the significance of the Christian Times, our voice being heard, why the narratives are important, and more importantly, you guys giving access to others just by way of, one, being in the space that you're in, and making sure that others are at the table as well. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back.
Okay, they're coming back. So I'll call
Welcome
you back.
back. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Coaxum Report. So, as you heard, for those of you that are just tuning in, this is Terry Coaxum and the Coaxum Report. You can catch us on Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Roku. I encourage you to download the app, our TV network app. And today I have the honor and pleasure of being joined by Reverend Dr. Dennis Dillon, who's a pioneer in his own right. Before we went on a quick commercial break, we were talking about a lot of his accomplishments as it related to media. You know, he started out in media. He has the Christian Times has been around for 33 years, which was history, which was really something that I didn't know. I know they were around for a long time, but 33 years. They started in 1990, and we were talking through.
That's almost older than you, Terry.
That's right, because I'm only 25. You're older than me. You're older than me, just saying, right? But we were talking a little bit about the barriers. And one thing that Reverend Dillon has been able to do throughout his tenure, both at the Christian Times and in his space as the founding and lead pastor at his church, is to give access. I mean, they have this conference called Black Church Mean Business. I remember way back when I worked for District Attorney Hines, you know, we used to come out to this conference. It's always an opportunity to get information, to get access not only to churches, but churches and business and faith leaders and also nonprofit organizations. So you've always done that. And so we were just talking a little bit about the Christian Times and the importance of having a media outlet that gives us our voice in our own words. And you touched on something that was really significant, and we took a quick commercial break, but want to come back to that. You started talking about the Black church being a sleeping giant. And so what I want you to do is kind of really help us understand what you mean by that. The Black church being a sleeping giant.
Well, if I could parlay for a quick moment and just talk about the church revolution in general, it
Yes.
is important that we understand that much of the power that Europe has today grew out of the church.
Right.
If we understand that colonization driven by the church, if we
That's
understand
right.
capitalism and economic globalization
Right.
out of the church. If we look at the new dynamics and the new trends that we're seeing today, whether it's coming, if you look at the Islamic economic revolution coming from the mosques and the temples, if we look at much of the dynamics around the rise and the empowerment of Jewish communities and Jewish nations, very clearly that has risen from the synagogue. So there's no doubt that where people gather, and all church means, Terry, as you probably know, from the Greek, is the gathering place.
Mm-hmm.
So because this is the main central gathering place for Black people, it becomes strategic as a vehicle that facilitates growth and empowerment. That's why all politicians, if they want to be elected, guess where they're going to begin to strategize going to first and foremost?
The churches.
Because the church has that power. We have, at the Christian Times, worked with so many corporations like Macy's and, believe it or not, the Daily News, most of the major banks, JP Morgan, Chase, Citi, the list goes on, in terms of getting their information to the community through the church. So from that vantage point, it's a giant. The other piece that I think is critical to understand, and churches across the globe, certainly I want to see some rising in the Caribbean. I've been traveling across the continent of Africa, and we've been teaching and training, and I've got an African delegation that's coming to New York in November to be a part of this Black Church Means Business Resurgence Conference movement. And at the end of the day, the church has the best capacity for economic development, for affordable housing, for commercial malls and commercial strips. I remember years ago, because my teaching and my ministry has always been about empowerment. And I was invited to this huge Pentecostal church in Port of Spain, Trinidad, many years ago. And I preached a revival for several days. And I remember on the final night of the revival, I actually made an appeal for those who want to come together, not just to accept the Lord this time, but those who want to come together and start their own business. And I said, listen, there is over 2,000 people in this congregation. Just imagine if you all pooled together. I
That's
mean,
right.
the supermarket survive on less than 2,000 customers. You could just, your church alone, own your own supermarket.
That's
And
right.
they took it so seriously that they called me back a year later, and they were literally beginning to build that supermarket in
That's right. That's right.
in Port of Spain, rather. Um, there's so much that the church can do. When we look at a city like New York City, who have the most real estate, commercial real estate in Black communities, and I put commercial in quotes. In this case, it just means non-residential. As we know, churches are mostly not-for-profit, but these
Right.
are not residential real estate. And who have the capacity and yet there's all of this real estate. So churches are to a great degree land rich and cash poor, and so we begin to teach the whole concept. If you're land and yet cash poor, and land is the source of wealth building, how do you realize the power of your real estate to generate wealth? These are the dynamics, and I could keep going about just.
Now, I want you to pause a minute because you just touched on something else that was really significant and important. I mean, we're going to go back because you described how the church is a giant in so many things, and being able to take the lead in so many movements, including, even go back to the Civil War, even before the Civil War. The churches have always been very significant in our communities, and they still are. So we're going to go back to being a sleeping giant, because I need individuals that are listening to our show to understand the significance of waking up, the significance of being who we are, right? Because we already have the buying power. We have the land. So we're talking about being cash poor and land rich. That kind of seems like an oxymoron to me, but I understand it to be true. And so that's why I want to pause there for a minute, because I need you to kind of explain, and in your conference, the Black Church Mean Business, you explain this a lot, how we're able to build wealth and why we should be building wealth and why our money should be making money for us as opposed to the other way around. And so that's why I want to pause you on this for a moment, because we understand the significance of the Black church, and we understand it in our history, and we understand it now in our present, right? Because you made it very clear through the movements that you just described. And so you also started off by saying sleeping. The Black church is sleeping, which means that they're not as active as they could be in an activated state. And so I want to kind of figure out how that barrier can be met, because it's all about best practices and big ideas. And so I want to touch on that a little bit. And then I want to go on to talk about the next part, which is how we are cash poor and land rich, and how we can translate that into wealth. Because if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. Right. So let's talk a little bit. Let's just back up a little bit, and let's talk a little more about activating the inactive church, because we are clear on the things that we're able to do as a gathering place, working collectively towards the same goals. We're able to accomplish much. One of the things, I remember a publication that you used to have, and it explained to us Black billionaires and millionaires. And you gave us a listing of the industries that they were in, and then the significance of why this mattered, right? And so I want to back up to how we're able to waken this sleeping giant, because once the giant is wake, we're able to do so much more with all of the wealth that we have collectively in this gathering place, which is the church. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other oxymoron is a giant. Obviously it's not a giant if it's sleeping. So the bottom line is to your point, the wake up agenda. And here's what I believe that is critical and key, and I'm going to be very biblical around this. And that is, God, when he created mankind, the first command that he gave had nothing to do with the 10 commandments. His first command was to have dominion over, and he named the land, over the air, and over the waters. Everything in the water, everything on the land, and everything in the air. Believe it or not, everything that fits within the framework of global economics operate within those three spaces.
That's right.
The spheric space, which is the land, all of your minerals, your diamonds, ore, it's all there. Within the atmospheric realm, within that realm, you have everything that facilitates our ability to communicate right now. Folks don't understand that as much as I'm sitting here on a computer, you're probably on one, and folks are all over the globe on their devices hearing us. All of that is because of what God has actually placed within the atmospheric realm.
That's right.
We need to move to control there as well. And certainly the hydrospheric becomes the third. So solid, liquid, and gas. The bottom line is matter, matter. It's all there. And so here's what I think needs to do to wake this giant up. I think the focus has to move not to dismiss the importance of a social agenda, but the focus needs to move from a social agenda to an economic agenda.
Okay.
And I think that's where we have been hugely weak. There has been such a heavy focus on the social agenda, particularly the church.
That's right.
And then we have moved from even the social to the political. And when we do the political to facilitate the social. And at the end of the day, we miss the whole piece about dominion. Dominion translates to ownership, owning real estate. And
That's
so
right.
I believe that the more we move in that direction,
that's right.
the more we're going to see this church rise. As I stated earlier, as much as the church is the oxymoron, a sleeping giant, the church is more awake than literally every other element within the Black community and within the world. So if the church wakes up fully, then everybody else will wake up. And if I could just make this point, when we understand the evolution of Wall Street, no Trinity Church on Broadway, at the corner of Broadway and Wall Street, no Wall Street. Back in the days when these communities were built, guess what? The whole concept of a steeple was not just for this, because I used to, years ago, wonder why they need this long thing going up that serves literally no purpose. Serves no purpose to us now, but back in those days, the church pointed you to the commerce district downtown.
Wow.
That's what the steeple did. That was one of the main purpose of the steeple. Follow the steeple, you will get to the bank, you will get to Main Street, you will get to the retail shops, and you will get to the center of commerce and the hub. The Black church in America, the Black church across this globe have to move to the place where we understand that a core function of the church is to facilitate how we achieve economic growth, economic transformation, and economic.
So to be the guiding light in economic growth, be the guiding light and economic transformation, and understanding the history and understanding that steeple represented that community, right? So if you're following that steeple, you're now going to be in a place where you need to be at. And so, and I think it's really important, especially for those that are listening throughout the Caribbean and those that are in Southeast Asia, and of course here in the United States, to understand the importance of economic wealth, economic growth, and how to get there, right? I think it's really, really important for us to really talk about this on the show, because that's how we're enlightening people across this nation to understand what they're able to do. And I think that's really, really, really important. So we're talking about this sleeping giant, the church being the sleeping giant, the history of the church, and how the church has been an integral part of our communities. And then you had the audacity, the unmitigated tenacity to come up with the Christian Times 33 years ago, still standing, still representing, still sharing the narrative in our communities. And then from the Christian Times. Now, how long have you been doing this conference, Brev?
We've been doing the conference since 1994.
Again.
So that's almost as long. And
as the Christian Times.
A daunting task. So just imagine how old I was in 1994, booking the Jacob Jackson Center.
That's right.
For a conference. It was daunting. It was intimidating. The beautiful ups is that over 3,400 people attended the conference, according to the New York Times and Crane's New York Business back then. And they both reported a year later that there has been such an upsurge around economic growth in the Black community. And this is what fueled churches to form community development corporations and a host of other initiatives. I remember after the conference, I was traveling across the city to churches, working with them to set up for-profit enterprises. So just on the solution side, because I think that is so critical, Terry, I want to just touch upon a couple of them. Number one, it is key and critical that every church that is serious about empowering your people, your community, and transforming lives, that every church should have an economic empowerment ministry. In addition to your ushers ministry, in addition to men's ministry, women's ministry, youth ministry, your North Carolina club or
South Carolina club,
or your Kingston club or what your travel groups. Every church should have an economic empowerment ministry.
Okay, we're gonna pause on that because we got to take a quick commercial break. We're gonna pause. We're gonna come back to the economic empowerment group that needs to be in the church, and Reverend Dennis Dillon is gonna tell us again the significance of that, why it's important, but more importantly, how we're able to awaken this giant and take our wealth to another level. It's not just about making money anymore. It's about building wealth and leaving a legacy. We're gonna take a quick break on the Coaxum Report, and we'll be right back.
Time. It has a different meaning in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It goes backwards, forwards, it stops. St. Croix is rooted in history. So much of it still remains untouched.
I remember running on these streets as a kid. This shop was right down there. It opened the same year I was born. This is where the original Crucian hook was born. It's the symbol of these islands. And I wanted to have my hands in that very same history. I want to be able to pass it down to my family while still putting a new spin on it.
The U.S. Virgin Islands, we have an amazing culture that developed over time from all over the world.
St. John feels so untouched. Being underwater is like another world. There's no worries, there's no stress. I can just escape. This is my happy place. My passion for scuba diving came at just being fascinated with the water and wanting to be a mermaid. And this is the closest thing I can get to achieving mermaid status. Canadians just love being outdoorsy. We live for adventure, so we love anything hiking, being on the water, diving, snorkeling, and St. John has it all.
It's like some spirit is protecting the island and keeping them raw. The Makajumbi watches over the island. From up there, they keep the evil spirits away. The nightlife in St. Thomas is absolutely amazing. There's always something going on. Everyone comes together to dance and catch a vibe. We're always celebrating. We celebrate freedom, culture, the food, the smell, the music. It's always a celebration. The people here are probably the most priceless thing because they keep the culture going. There's so many different influences on these islands. Food from all kinds of countries coming together in new dishes. All of us came from somewhere, but all that we call this home. The VI is a new melting pot. This is where the past and the future comes together.
I used to watch BET, MTV, VH1, now I watch Tempo. Soca, Calypso, Reggae Dancehall. Don't stall, better get tuned in to the tempo. Don't have cable, they got an app. Go to your app store, download that. Whether it's tourism, cuisine, or the social scenes, if it ain't Tempo, it's a rap. Who got the Caribbean views? Tempo. It's the latest in Caribbean news. Tempo. You tryna cook Caribbean food? Tempo. You know they got the music videos too. Tempo. Who got the Caribbean views? Tempo. It's the latest in Caribbean news. Tempo. You tryna cook Caribbean food? Tempo. You know they got the music videos too. Tempo.
Welcome back to the Coaxum Report. So for those of you that are just listening, you can catch us again on Amazon Fire TV, on Android TV, Apple TV, on Roku. You can also download our app, ourtv.network, and watch this again. Join me live every Wednesday from 2:30 to 3:30. I'm super delighted to have Reverend Dennis Dillon on the Coaxum Report today. Reverend Dennis Dillon has really been dropping a lot of nuggets. Currently, Reverend Dillon is the lead pastor, but he's also the founder and has been spearheading the movement, I would call it, with the Christian Times, making sure that our voice is heard, our narratives are heard, and our narratives and voice are heard through us. In addition to that, the Black Church Being Business Conference has been around for close to 30 years as well, and really making sure that we're bringing the churches, business organizations, nonprofit organizations, corporate leaders together on one accord to build wealth. A lot of times, Reverend Dillon, as young people in certain communities, we don't experience wealth, so we don't know what that means. So we're conditioned to working a 9 to 5 and hoping and praying that we're able to sustain our lifestyles with the bare minimum. And so, I like to, refer to one of my books, that Think and Grow Rich, and The Richest Man in Babylon, to understand that that's not how you build wealth. That's not how legacy is built. That 9 to 5 is not going to do it for us. And so we talked about the church, this giant in our communities. The church, not only is it a giant, it speaks our history. It allows us, Anthony, who's our producer backstage, put down that it's symbolic that the church steeple and a compass to the center of commerce and economics. So the church steeple being a compass to commerce and economics in Reverend Dillon's last set of nuggets that he talked about, that church steeple guiding you to the downtown area, guiding you, before GPS, right? Before GPS, you had the church. And the churches were guiding you to that downtown area of commerce and economics. And so that church is still that giant. And Reverend Dillon talked about awakening that giant through empowerment, through encouragement, through, this Black Church Being Business Conference, but more importantly, through partnerships and collaborations. And so those are a couple of the nuggets that Reverend Dylan dropped, and I want to bring him back on to talk a little bit more about solutions, because we're all solution oriented. We talked about some barriers to access. We talked about some best practices and what he's able to do with the Christian Times and what he is able to do with the Black Church Means Business Resurgence Conference. And now we want to talk about, big ideas. What else do you vision being the next step or the best step for our communities as it relates to our churches, as it relates to the media, but more importantly, as it relates to building wealth and economic development and sustaining our communities in our spaces and in our time?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I talked about, and thank you, Terry, great summation. I talk about the importance of every church having an economic empowerment ministry.
That's right.
Secondly, I believe that every clergy should commit at least one sermon per quarter to talk economics and to talk about wealth creation and all of these key and core dynamics. Number three, I believe that within the churches, there must be a directory of the business owners within that congregation, and there must be encouragement from the pulpit in the bulletins elsewhere to encourage the economic reciprocity of consumers, particularly within the specific congregations, doing business with the other members within those congregations.
Hold on now, you dropped some real solid solutions as far as your best practice are concerned. And so I need to back that up, because I wasn't expecting to have to get out my pen, my pen or my pencil so early with my notepad. But you talked about every church should have an economic empowerment arm, a chapter, a club, right? And then not just a club. We don't want you to have a club for the sake of having a South Carolina club, North Carolina club, a women's ministry. We want to have a club, an economic club with some real power and impact, not just power, but power and impact within the church. Then you talked about our faith leaders having a sermon or a lesson, so to speak, around what economic empowerment means, encouraging and inspiring the members to build wealth in a significant way. And I gotta pause and shout out to Bustasaurus, right? So Bustasaurus in New Jersey, right? And he had this whole model for his church just around that economic empowerment. I remember going to the church and being blown away when folks said, I paid off my mortgage in 15 years. I was able to pay off my student loans, and all because he had a real emphasis in his sermons and even in the book he wrote around economic empowerment and building wealth. And so you talked about having your spiritual leader be the head of this economic empowerment arm. And then you talked about a directory. Now you took it to another level, right? You're talking about having the members know each other, know who's in your church, know who's in your congregation, know what they're responsible for. And not only just know them, you also say, do business with them. You are encouraging our leaders to encourage their members to do business with each other, because that is how we build wealth, right? And so I can't just let you just gloss over all of those great nuggets without breaking them down in a way that it makes sense. Because again, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense, right? So knowing that you have a Fortune 500 company in your congregation, and you're not utilizing them to help the other members build wealth and become Fortune 500s is a disservice, is what I hear you saying. I hear you saying that we must be inclusive and encouraging and inspiring, but most importantly, it comes from the leader. The leader needs to now first understand the importance of this economic development and how to get your entire congregation on board. You shouldn't just have two members driving that nice car that's paid off, by the way. You should have all of your members with nice cars that are paid off.
Yeah, and I think understanding some of the key dynamics around economic growth.
All right, y'all, get your pens ready. He ready to drop some more knowledge.
It's so key and critical. When we understand wealth in America, we know that Black wealth is 8 times less than white wealth in America. And believe it or not, we've seen the Asian community just growing and shooting up. 10 years ago, blacks were number 2 when it comes to home ownership. Now we're at the very bottom.
Wow.
Whites is at 75%, Asians at 62.1%.
Wow.
The Hispanics are at 51%. They were way below blacks. Now blacks are at 43.6%.
Wow.
Only 46.3% of blacks in America own homes. That's really what households are homeowners. So that's key. Then the other data that is deeply troubling is that less than a half of a percent, way less than a half a percent of black people in America own businesses that employ at least one person. These are
that right there is sad though. That's disturbing and alarming.
A half of 1%, and as
That's
much as Asians are at 28.3%. And by the way, this is all in this year's economic state of the Black World Report and economic state of Black.
And then how do you get a copy of that?
The report is going to be available online at the New York Christian Times website, nychristiantimes.com. The report is released in September, this year's report. We've done the pre-report, which we will probably talk about in September, but the full report comes out in September, and everybody should get a copy of this report and really study these numbers, because the needle for Black people in America is just not moving.
Wow.
I'm talking about the economic needle. It's not moving. We have to what we need to do to move the needle. And again, building wealth is number 1 on the list, and number 2 on the list is we got to create more Black-owned businesses. Now, with that comes some other key components that will be a part of the conference this year. One is access to capital.
Always important.
Fortunately, New York market alone, Black people are depositing in excess of, listen to this number, in excess of $190 billion in only the 7 major banks in the New York market. And Black people are not getting access to loans, to commercial loans, to any significant degree. The number is like so much less than 1% that it is pitiful. So at the end of the day, how do we change these dynamics? Because I don't want us to spend the whole time talking about the problem. And that's why I want us, as you're doing, Terry, to outline some specific solutions steps that must be taken to fix this problem.
That's right. That's right. And I think that you have really touched on some really significant solutions. One, understanding our spending power, right? Understanding our deposit power. Because if we're depositing our monies and we're not asking for anything in return collectively, we're going to continue to be ignored. But then again, I think that's where the Black church steps in. And I don't mean just the Black church, I mean the Black and brown church, because Latinos also are, being outpaced. And I'm seeing a lot of the numbers that are alarming, quite frankly, because I remember growing up in the South, having my, the Black barber and the Black fish market, and, having all the Black laundry, the Black cleaners, all of these places were Black owned. The taxi cab companies here in New York City were, Black Pearl, and all of these different significant staples in our community no longer exist. And so when you're telling me the numbers are so low, it's alarming and disturbing, because they represented wealth in our communities in a big way. Unfortunately, they even owned all the liquor stores, and the laundromats were another spot for us. We don't own those things anymore. We don't own the liquor stores. We don't own the laundromats. We don't own the barbershops. We don't own the taxi cab companies. And those are alarming things.
Don't forget to talk about the funeral homes.
Yeah, the funeral homes.
20, 30 years ago in New York City, we own all of the funeral homes in our neighborhoods, and that's the one business that we could say for sure that Black consumers were doing business with Black businesses, but that's even our reality today. So it seems in a lot of ways we are progressing in a reverse direction.
That's right. That's right. And you know, it really is something that I want to leave solutions. Like, we don't leave this show without solutions. So a way for us to gain wealth and to is first to understand it. And so what Reverend Dylan is saying is understand the importance of who you are, right? Understanding your spending power. Yeah, tapping into your churches. Your church is a staple in a community, right? They're the guiding light. Tapping into your churches, your church leaders tapping into their congregations, having an economic, an economic arm in your churches, not just an economic arm, preaching about prosperity and how you're able to build work, making sure that your members understand what other members are in that have business in the congregations and be able to utilize this business. I'm an Eastern Star, and I know my Mason brothers. If I'm looking for a specific thing, I was looking for a tow truck the other day. I text one of my brothers and say, "Can you tell me where there's a tow truck in this area?" The same thing in churches. These are networking opportunities that are being missed. And this is how we're building wealth in our communities. And this is how we're being inclusive. Also making sure that we're supporting the Christian Times and other like newspapers that are our people telling our story in our time so that we can write history in our way as opposed to history being written about us. So there's a lot of different solutions that you've offered in this conversation. Unfortunately, it's silly how time flies when you're having fun, right? You know, we've come to the very end of the Coaxum Report for today, but we're definitely going to get you back on to talk about the conference. We're going to share some of the findings. You know, I'll make sure I get a copy, a pre-copy, and a post-copy so I can look at some of those numbers, because the one thing that I want to make sure that we have educated consumers, that we have educated business owners, and that we are able to take this thing to the next level based on all the access that we have right now. This is the perfect time for us to do business globally, not just locally. And so it's important for us to do that. And so I want to leave you with the final thoughts, Reverend Dylan. And I want to thank you again for being a part of the Coaxum Report.
I certainly just want to take a moment to really thank you, Terry, and to salute you and the Coaxum Report for the work that you're doing, and to certainly charge you to keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And finally, what I really want to say to us, and that is we must truly begin to create a culture of commerce. And not just
culture of commerce. Love it. Culture of commerce.
And not just a commerce of culture. Black folks have been for a long time with just a commerce of culture. The dynamics have to change around the dinner table, in the church basements, from the church pulpit, wherever we are, in our lodges, in our organizations. We need to now begin to create this revolution. And it is what I call a culture of commerce revolution.
Absolutely. So we're creating wealth. We're creating this culture. And I want to thank you again, Reverend Dennis Dillon, for being a part of the Coaxum Report. And I look forward to building wealth together. Have a super amazing day on purpose. Take care and be blessed.
Stay well.